Look, the shock of what Melbourne is in for here is still dawning on many Victorians, let alone the rest of the country. This lockdown and the curfew that goes with it are extreme. They will kill businesses, destroy jobs, disrupt lives, create social problems and, according to the experts, even cost lives through the impact of loneliness and depression. The idea that a government would impose a curfew on its people in any circumstances but the most dire wartime emergency seems unbelievable. The virus suddenly becomes more contagious at 8 o'clock at night, does it? Or people suddenly become less responsible? There is every chance that the $300 billion or more we've blown on the national lockdown this year will have been completely wasted, merely delaying rather than preventing our eventual confrontation with the reality of the virus. And it's abundantly clear the extreme operation in Victoria is being sold on false hope, on a widespread false outlook that's being perpetuated by politicians and community leaders. It goes something like this.
All of these measures are designed to support people to make the best choices for their family, for every family, for public health, and to get us to the other side of this as quickly as possible. That is essential to driving these numbers down and getting us to the other side of this. To avoid a fine, to keep your family safe, to keep every family safe, to get to the other side of this faster. Please do the right thing. Please make better decisions. It's heartbreaking to have to take these steps, but if we don't, then we will never get to the other side of this. We've all got to invest in this, as painful and difficult as it is, so that we can get to the other side.
The other side? This is the false hope. The other side? Go through the lockdown and you'll end up in nirvana and all will be well. That's just not the case. The lockdown, if it works, will slow infections dramatically and put Victoria back where it was on the infection curve a month or so back. But what then? It'll still have the virus, the world will still have the virus, and measures will still be in place, they'll have to be in place to prevent any further outbreaks. And if there is another outbreak, what then? Another lockdown? This is why on this program we've talked to medical experts, economists, business people and politicians for a long while now about a sustainable approach, about how we have to find a way to live with the virus, not keep shutting down every time there are some hundreds of infections. All this changes, of course, if there is a highly effective and widely available vaccine. But experts tell us that might be years away or might never come. This is not new. We've been talking about this for weeks and months on this program, and I've been writing about it too. But politicians keep pretending they can get shutdowns and get us to the other side. This is becoming so obvious now that even the panic merchants and lockdown barrackers at the ABC are starting to wake up. Here's the ABC's medical expert, Norman Swan, this morning.
What happens if there is no vaccine?
This is the conversation I think that Australia has to have. We are behaving, and governments are behaving, in the hope, you can just see it in their eyes, in the hope that there will be a vaccine sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. And there is no guarantee of that. We all hope. There's some very promising results, but there may not be. It's not an easy bug to actually get a vaccine to. So what if there's not? And having that conversation.
Yes, and that conversation is one we've been delving into here for months. It means talking about how many infections we can tolerate each day, how much healthcare capacity we have, how we can protect the vulnerable, especially in aged care homes, how we can improve the treatment of coronavirus patients, and what is the value in lockdowns if you still have to deal with the virus eventually anyway. Coincidentally, in the US today, Donald Trump has cited Australia as an example of why lockdowns are not the permanent solution.
It's important for all Americans to recognize that a permanent lockdown is not a viable path toward producing the result that you want, or certainly not a viable path forward, and would ultimately inflict more harm than it would prevent. Lockdowns do not prevent infection in the future. They just don't. Countries where there have been very significant flare-ups over the last short period of time are Spain, Germany, France, Australia.
The trouble is, of course, because he says so much that is wild, because the pandemic has created such trauma in the US, and because large sections of politics and the media oppose anything and everything he says, the President's contribution might actually see the lockdown barrackers harden their resolve. But we can't afford to be so silly. We have to do what is logical and what is rational. There were another 11 deaths in Melbourne over the past 24 hours. They were all in aged care facilities. With more than 1,000 aged care residents still infected, we can expect to see many more deaths yet. We ought to be finding the cleverest, most foolproof ways to keep the disease out of aged care facilities rather than pretending we can make the virus go away. Instead, we learned today that in Victoria, people who had tested positive for coronavirus and were isolating at home were actually allowed to leave home for exercise. Really? You let infected people wander the streets of the city and you wonder why there are more cases. When 3,000 random checks were made on those supposed to be in isolation, they found 800. More than 25% of them were not home. How reckless. Exercise is now banned, with heavy fines on offer.
It's very difficult to enforce this if people have a lawful excuse, and if some people are going to use that to try and justify other decisions. They were at no point getting exercise, they were doing something else. I apologise to those who were doing the right thing, but we simply have no choice but to move to that setting.
Just another example of how this thing has been bungled in Victoria. When it comes to the economy, the real problem here is small business. Don't get me wrong, there are many people suffering, and those who have lost their jobs or worried about losing their jobs are really going to be high on that list of concern. The hardship that people are facing is heartbreaking. But it's only made worse by all the people on taxpayer-funded salaries who seem to be thinking that a lockdown is a doddle, encouraging the lockdowns. But the damage to small business is the worst because they are the backbone of the country. They generate the jobs. People have invested their savings, taken a punt, worked themselves into the ground to create a cafe, a building company, a butcher's shop, a restaurant or 1,000 other useful businesses. They employ people, create jobs for other people, spend money on accountants, lawyers, cleaners and other services, and then the government closes them for a lockdown. And then they get closed down again. And they wonder if they can ever get going again. If these businesses fail, we don't only kill the jobs of the people they employ, we crush the life's work of families and we turn job creators into welfare recipients. This stuff is just fundamental. It runs the risk of doing generational harm. It is a deep worry. No wonder people in Victoria are angry and uncertain. And that brings me to another important point. There are reports today of resistance and violence against police in Victoria, police who are just trying to enforce compulsory masks and curfew rules. That is despicable and it can never be tolerated. The laws are the laws and the police are doing their duty in difficult times, dealing with rules they never would have imagined imposing. If you oppose what the Andrews government is doing, let your politicians know. Don't break the law. And don't take it out on the police.